Hello and welcome. I am Alexa Gilmore, your friendly neighborhood AccuDoc, and this is your daily dose of no-nonsense medicine. And today we're going to do an introduction to building an anti-inflammatory pantry and fridge. There are a lot of dietary specifics that we can dig into on a case-by-case basis, but if we're trying to reduce inflammation and support our healthiest brains and bodies over the long term, what does that look like in a general, broad strokes kind of way? Where do we start? First off, a reminder of why we should even care. Why is it important to think about anti-inflammatory eating at all? So, dietary inflammation occurs when you regularly consume foods that trigger or exacerbate inflammation in your body. Certain foods that are particularly high are refined sugars, unhealthy fats, processed ingredients. They can promote the release of these pro-inflammatory compounds. And when that inflammation becomes chronic, it puts stress on the body and it interferes with normal cellular processes, which leads to all kinds of things, including insulin resistance, which is a factor in type 2 diabetes, including arterial damage. So that contributes to heart disease and cardiovascular disease, including joint degradation. So conditions like rheumatoid arthritis or arthritis in general, and immune system dysfunction, which can contribute to autoimmune diseases. So when we focus on reducing dietary inflammation, we can help protect our body from these chronic illnesses and promote overall health. It's important to emphasize that when we say, quote, anti-inflammatory eating, the translation, it's really just eating real food. And we should let that sink in for a minute, that so many of us, and as a culture, as a society, we're so far away from eating real food that when we're trying to eat that way, we have to give it a special name as if it's a special diet. It's crazy how many obstacles we have in the modern West to simply eating real food. And if this feels like a hurdle for you or a burden to make these changes, it's not your fault. Our system around food is crazy. But here we are. And the reality is, whether we like it or not, most of us do have to relearn what it means to eat real food and how to actually do it. So anti-inflammatory eating, real food eating, it's important because chronic inflammation, like I said, is linked to basically every serious chronic health condition, and also to many, many less serious, but still very pesky ones that might be happening for you right now. So when we pay attention to reducing the inflammation that's coming at us through the food we eat, and there's a lot of it, as we'll get into, we help protect our bodies from developing these chronic illnesses over time. And we also help build your health over time. And we also help heal any of these conditions that we may already be grappling with. So how big of a deal is this? Just in my own clinical practice, I encounter this almost every day. Every day in the clinic, in order to actually heal the myriad symptoms that people bring to me, wanting help with, wanting to feel better, we've got to change our eating. And we're not just talking about catastrophic illness. It's if you're coming to someone like me, because you're mostly not coming to me for catastrophic illness, but you've got any kind of chronic symptoms. So it may be digestive issues like IBS or IBD or Crohn's disease, or any kind of hormonal or endocrine imbalance. So the whole host of symptoms that accompany middle age and the perimenopausal years, any kind of menstrual irregularities, fertility issues. I work with food a lot in the context of fertility. If you've got an autoimmune condition or any other kind of chronic condition that you're looking for help managing, or you're just feeling crummy. Like, how many of us just feel crummy? You feel crummy and nothing's quote unquote the matter, but that you know that you can feel better. That's so many of us. If you come to me or someone like me for any of these reasons, acupuncture for sure helps. If you know me, you know that I am confident that if everybody received acupuncture once a week, we would live in a totally different world. We'd have a completely different health landscape. So acupuncture can help. Herbs and supplements can and do help, and I also work with them every day. But more often than not, the type and the quality of the food that you eat is still fundamental to actually healing the chronic, ongoing internal medicine conditions that you're seeking help for, to just feel better. So it's fundamental not only to your health over the long term and preventing all the degenerative diseases of aging, but it's fundamental to your ability to resolve your symptoms in the here and now. So I also have to say that this is true whether we like it or not. We don't always like that it's true. I've certainly resisted that it's true over the course of my lifetime. But it's true, whether we like it or not, whether we find it convenient or not, because it mostly isn't, not with the lives that we live, not with the food culture that we have. So I understand the resistance, but then you start to do it and you start to feel so much better and you see the benefit, and it does eventually become a positive feedback loop. I should never make promises, but I almost want to promise you that it does. So thinking about our pantry and our fridge and what we do and don't keep there in our homes, this is like ground zero. How do we really set ourselves up for success, both in terms of the varieties of the foods that we have on hand and the things that we'd be better off avoiding? So let's start with what are the basics of anti-inflammatory? And let's start with the foods that we want to limit or avoid. So processed foods are number one. This is a huge topic. It's a huge category of food in terms of the way that a lot of us eat these days. So it's a lot for people sometimes to move away from processed food. But the good news is that the more that we do that, the more we automatically reduce our intake of a whole host of problematic, let's even call it like pseudo food, a bunch of very inflammatory food-like substances that sneak in as food, as processed food. So this is huge. This is the eat real food part. This is probably the biggest key in terms of anti-inflammatory eating, or simply eating for health now and over the long term. Processed foods, or you may have heard the term that's come into fashion lately, ultra-processed foods. We just have so much evidence that these foods specifically, processed foods specifically, are a primary driver for chronic illness. So what's processed food? When we say processed food, there's a lot of ways to think about it. We'll cover a couple now. One way to think about it is anything that requires a factory to make it. So thinking to yourself, could I make this in my own kitchen if I wanted to? So like tomato sauce, you could make in your own kitchen. Even cookies, you could make in your own kitchen. But Cheetos, harder to make in your own kitchen. Crackers, harder to make in your own kitchen. So like that's one way to think about processed and ultra processed. Processed food, so that's number one. Then processed food means it contains things that I wouldn't find on my pantry shelf or in my fridge or on my spice rack as a raw ingredient. If something has ingredients in it that you wouldn't know how to buy or where to source as a single ingredient, then you're probably looking at an ultra-processed food. Move away from prepackaged, processed, ultra-processed foods and more toward real food is a huge part of this anti-inflammatory real food learning curve. And don't let labels trick you. Part of this process too is to really start reading labels. Plenty of quote unquote organic convenience food is still pretty ultra processed, or it may contain inflammatory oils, which we'll touch on again in a minute. Organic doesn't mean it's not inflammatory. Organic is obviously a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It means certain things about pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. Choosing organic whenever we can is certainly part of making healthy choices for ourselves, for the land, for our farmers and farm workers, for the planet. But there's more to the story. Organic broccoli, great. Organic cookies, not anti-inflammatory. So that brings us to the second big piece here, which is sugar and our overdependence on simple carbohydrates as a main component of our diet. The overconsumption of sugar and simple carbohydrates in so many ways is the plague of the modern Western health landscape. It's so prevalent. It's so hard to avoid. Sugar is added to everything. Start reading labels and you'll start to see how that's the case. Sugar is also delicious and addictive and contributes to chronic illness. So we're talking about frank sugar, like added sugar, candies, cookies, cakes, sodas, as well as all of the hidden sugars that are added to processed foods. But when we talk about simple carbohydrates, we're also talking about refined carbohydrates like bread and pasta and crackers and breakfast cereal and muffins and pastries, and all of these things are made with white flour that quickly breaks down into sugar in the body. And chronically elevated blood sugar is a huge driver of inflammation and of cellular damage. Chronically fluctuating blood sugar, so when your blood sugar spikes after eating simple carbs and then crashes, that process, which so many of us, our body is managing that process every day, almost all day long, that process demands so many resources from the body to manage those spikes and crashes. And that means that those resources then aren't available for healing. They're not available for regulating. Even in young people, blood sugar issues contribute to all kinds of hormonal and endocrine and fertility problems. We're also not getting much actual nutrition when our diets are full of these kinds of foods. We're getting a lot of calories. We're getting a lot of quick energy, and that quick energy is really appealing and it feels good because we've crashed from that last simple carb meal. But we're not getting much nutrition. And of course, nutrition is fundamental to our body being able to heal and repair and regenerate itself. So not only are we creating tons of inflammation, but we're simultaneously denying our body the nutrition that it needs to help heal from that inflammation. So it's really important that we start stocking our pantries and our fridges differently and learning how to cook differently, one step at a time, so that we can stop leaning so heavily on these fast, easy, but really deficient foods, these simple carbohydrates. Okay, the next big category are industrial fats and oils. A lot to say here as well. And it can get complicated quickly, so we'll try to keep it simple. First off, and again, read labels. Avoid hydrogenated fats. Hydrogenated fats don't exist in nature. They are a creation of the food industry where food scientists have chemically modified vegetable oil, adding a hydrogen. So that's where we get the term hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated. They've done this in order to extend the shelf life of these fats and to increase their melting point to make them more suitable for frying. But this is an oddly shaped fat that our bodies didn't encounter in the whole history of our existence until it was created in a food science lab. These fats have no benefits to our health. We know that fats in general are really important, and I'll speak more to that, but these kinds of fats have no known benefits and lots of known negative impacts on our health, including slowing our metabolism, causing weight gain, increasing inflammation, lowering our good cholesterol, raising our bad cholesterol, and thereby contributing to all of the illnesses that we're talking about here. So diabetes, obesity, heart attack, stroke, dementia, cancer, any chronic illness with an inflammatory component, i.e. most chronic illnesses. And it's hidden in all kinds of processed foods. So simple blanket rule, if the label says hydrogenated, put it back on the shelf. The second thing that I want to mention are vegetable oils, which are sneaky little devils, also found in all kinds of processed foods, cakes, cookies, chips, pretzels, popcorn, crackers, sauces, condiments, salad dressings, and also cause all kinds of problems. When we say vegetable oil, we mean things like canola oil, corn oil, cottonseed oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil. Start looking at labels and you'll discover that these oils are ubiquitous in processed and packaged foods. The processing of these kinds of oils isn't simple. It's not like pressing an olive and then voila, you get olive oil. It's a multi-step industrial process. And it strips these oils of any nutrition that they may have had. So again, they're not additive to our health in any appreciable way. And they're high in what we call omega-6 fatty acids. Now, again, this can get complicated. Let's try to keep it simple. We need small amounts of omega-6 fatty acids, but we need them in the right ratio to what are called omega-3 fatty acids, which I'll talk more about later. What's important to know is that the ideal ratio is like 2-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3, or even 1-to-1, 6-to-3. But in the average American, that ratio is 10-to-1, or even 20-to-1. So it's way out of balance. And the consumption of these oils can be or are, if you're eating them a lot, a major driver of that imbalance. And when those ratios are that far out of balance, what does it lead to? Lots of inflammation. Okay, think about processed meats, sausages, bacon, luncheon meats, hot dogs, pepperoni, salami. Processed meats contain chemicals like nitrates and preservatives that can trigger inflammation. They're also typically high in saturated fat and sodium, all of which are contributors to chronic inflammation. So you want to take a look at that. Dairy. This is a tricky one. There's lots that I could say. You definitely want to think about your source, and you definitely want to think about the quantity. A little bit of dairy now and again, a little bit of any of this stuff, honestly, now and again. Not a big deal. A little bit of dairy now and again, for those who can tolerate it, no big deal. But large amounts of cheese, yogurt, cottage cheese on a regular basis, more often than not, this is pushing these inflammatory processes. There's also other significant impacts that large amounts of dairy can have on the body when we're looking at it through a Chinese medicine lens. I'm not going to get into that now. I think it's always helpful to think of dairy much more as a special occasion or now and again kind of food, and not as a daily staple or a large quantities kind of food. So giving a look-see to that and seeing if you've got, is cheese a regular and big daily event for you, or milk or yogurt or things like that might not be serving you. And certainly dairy, it's important that dairy be organic whenever possible. And I'll talk a little bit more about that down the road. Alcohol. Definitely think about your alcohol consumption. This is a big and complex topic overall. Of course, people drink and use alcohol for lots of different reasons, but there is increasing evidence that alcohol in any amount acts as a poison in the body. It definitely affects blood sugar regulation, which, as I've already mentioned, contributes to inflammation. And another thing that I want to flag is it readily interrupts sleep. And this is a topic for another time, but if we're really looking and aspiring to build health and support healing and prevent chronic degenerative disease over time, one of the most important things we can do is work to increase the quantity and the quality of our sleep. And alcohol in most of us is really anathema to that endeavor. So taking a look at that in the context of anti-inflammatory eating. So now you're probably like, well, what can I eat? This can feel really overwhelming. I get this question a lot. I know that this type of eating can feel really restrictive at the start. Keep in mind that, or allow for the possibility that the fact that it feels restrictive at the start might be because our eating is actually so limited in terms of the actual real whole foods that we're consuming. Bagel, bread, pasta, crackers, tortillas, cereal. Nutritionally, that's one food. That's the same food. It's refined wheat flour in a bunch of different forms. There's not actually a lot of variability there. So as we and if we can begin to change our mindset around this and expand our thinking, improve our cooking chops, my hope is that eating this way actually starts to feel expansive. And also remember that you're just going to feel better. All right, so what are we eating? The basics. We're emphasizing whole plant-based foods. Michael Pollan, who's a great food journalist, among other journalistic endeavors, he's got a great line that I repeat often that I think are words to live by. It's eat real food, not too much, mostly plants. So fruits and vegetables, underscoring those vegetables. We need to fall in love with vegetables. I'm hopefully here to help with that. Nuts, seeds, legumes, and whole grains. All of these things are rich in nutrition. They're full of antioxidants and fiber, things that really deeply nourish the body and help us fight and prevent inflammation. So that's number one. Healthy fats, as opposed to the fats that we just have already talked about. Fats as a category of food have really gotten a bad rap. They're not your enemy. If you still have an understanding that they are your enemy, then I promise you that you have been misled, and I hope that you can open your mind a little bit. Fats are super important. We need them for all kinds of processes. They're also delicious. They help us feel satisfied after a meal. Bad fats, they are a problem. Fats drenched in sugar are a problem. And these kind of fats are everywhere. We've talked about that. But good fat is essential. And that variety, that omega-3 fatty acid that I mentioned, they have potent and specifically anti-inflammatory effects. So not just not inflammatory, so not just neutral, but specifically anti-inflammatory. So these are things like fatty fish. So think salmon, mackerel, herring, sardines, anchovies, flax seeds, walnuts. These are all high in those omega-3 fatty acids. Oysters also have a lot of these. Other healthy fats are things like olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil. So you want to make sure that you have, and even butter in small quantities, like good quality butter, delicious. So you want to make sure you have fats like these around and that you know how to use them, how to cook with them. Fats specifically, we need to know how to cook with them appropriately because even some good fats can turn into bad fats when we cook with them the wrong way or if they've gone rancid. So we need to be careful about the freshness, hopefully, we're thinking about the freshness of our food in general, but we really need to be careful about the freshness of oils and nuts and other fats that we're consuming. If they've gone rancid at all, or if they've spoiled, then rather than being neutral or even anti-inflammatory, they can actually become drivers of inflammation. Okay, so we can eat all kinds of whole foods and grains and fruits and vegetables and good quality fats, and then protein, all kinds of protein. Some people emphasize lean proteins here, and I agree none of us needs to be eating like greasy hamburgers every day. But I think more importantly is that we're thinking about the quality of the protein. So we've talked about fish, like we mentioned above, other kinds of fish, chicken, and good quality meat. Good quality meaning organic and pastured whenever possible. It is so important whenever possible to eat organic meat and dairy. I would even encourage you to only eat meat and dairy if it's organic. There's so much more to say on that. But just for now, remember that the quality of the meat is only as good as the quality of what that animal has been fed and how its health as an animal has been tended to. So with animal products, we have the added insults different from just plants, the added insults potentially of antibiotics and hormones. There's also pesticides like we have to worry about with plants, but there's pesticides on their feed that we can't wash off that they ingest and then are in their animal tissue. Never mind that as animals, they deserve to be raised with some dignity as fellow creatures. So keeping that idea when you're approaching meat protein of quality in mind. And then, of course, there's plant-based proteins. So beans, lentils, tofu, tempeh, these are all really good choices. But we won't eat them if they're not in our pantry. So let's try to get them in our pantry. And even if they are in our pantry, we won't eat them if we don't know how to cook with them. So if this is all new to you, I encourage you to just start somewhere. Start small and learn how to cook with, say, lentils, like make a dal. Learn how to cook a big batch of dry beans in a crock pot, and then you've got a bunch of beans for the week. You can freeze some off to portion out for different meals. Make a tempeh or a tofu stir fry with a bunch of veggies. Just start somewhere with all of this. Just start somewhere. Herbs and spices. It would be so great if we could all get way more well-versed in cooking with herbs and spices. For one, they make simple, healthy food choices really delicious, but they also, in and of themselves, are full of all kinds of nutrition. Antioxidants, they have lots of anti-inflammatory properties. So cooking with or learning how to cook with herbs being things like rosemary, thyme, sage, oregano, dill, mint, parsley, cilantro, rosemary, dried or fresh, and learning how to cook with spices. So different chili peppers, turmeric, ginger, cinnamon, paprika, cumin, cardamom, coriander, star anise. Spices have phytonutrients, they have antioxidants, they have anti-inflammatory properties, they're delicious. It doesn't have to be complicated. You can get well-versed in just a couple of herb spice profiles and then rework those into different meals. Again, don't feel like you have to do it all. I just encourage you to start somewhere and build from there. That's all we can ever do. And then the last piece is hydration. So this is less, of course, about what's in your pantry and more about looking at your relationship to beverages, although it does speak to maybe what isn't in your pantry. Think of beverages other than water, and like herbal teas could get in here, and coffee a day is fine, but throughout the day, beverages other than water, think about them as more special occasion. Proper hydration with water supports all of your cellular function. It helps reduce inflammation. So we need to drink plenty of water. what I see, interestingly, so track this in yourself, is for some reason water becomes a negotiation. Like, can I drink? And there's lots of negotiations that happen with all of this. So track this in yourself in general. But can I drink fizzy water? Does tea count? What if I add juice? Da, 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 da. And I have thoughts on all of that. But at the end of the day, let's just drink some water, at least 8 ounces, eight ounce glasses, right? Probably more. There's all kinds of guidelines, but at least 8 ounce glasses. It's a great place to start. Filtered water is best, especially if you're on city water, especially if you find the taste of the water coming out of your tap to be off-putting, and that gets in the way of you drinking water, which I understand. When I visit certain houses, I have an aversion to drinking water because I don't like the taste of the tap water. When I'm traveling and I'm in a hotel, I'm very aware that I avoid water. So if this is you, consider some kind of filtration so that you actually like or can learn to like the taste of water. I would definitely encourage you to avoid drinking bottled water on a regular basis. The chemicals and all the plastic, it's just not good for us. And honestly, all those plastic bottles aren't good for the planet. I think it's so important to remember that in all of this, when we're seeking health now and over the long term, the buck stops for our health. The buck stops at a healthy planet. We can't be healthy ourselves without a healthy planet, full stop. So just a friendly reminder that anything that we're doing in the pursuit of our own health, let's always try to stop and check it against how that's affecting the health of the planet around us. Okay, so checking in, how are you feeling? This can be a lot. And this has gotten long, so I'm going to actually go over kind of a list of pantry items in a second video, but a couple of things before I go. Please, I beg of you, do not use this guidance and these recommendations as another way to berate yourself or to shame yourself for not doing enough or not being enough or not knowing enough or not having enough. Or whatever your particular flavor of self-flagellation may be, you are enough. This can feel like a huge overhaul. It is a huge overhaul for a lot of us, but all we can do is start. So start somewhere. That's it. If you can just take one step at a time, take one piece of this, integrate it into your life and into your habits in a sustainable way. Just one piece integrated in a sustainable way. That's how this works. I don't know any other way to build a healthy life. No more, no less, just one step at a time. In fact, I might say that I don't want you to do all of these things at once. When people do that and I watch them try, there's this flurry of energy. They make all of the changes. None of them are sustainable or solidly integrated into the fabric and the routine and the reality of their day-to-day lives. They hit a wall. It all falls apart. And here we are right back where we started. So please don't do that. You do you. Some people do really well doing a lot of things at once. So you do you, but you don't need to do that. Just start somewhere, anywhere. Look around here somewhere, wherever you're listening to this or watching this for part 2 of this little intro series. Reach out with questions, write them in the comments, message me. Remember that as long as you woke up this morning, you can change your life today. You can start to change your health today, just one step at a time. Okay, thanks for being here. Bye for now.